I never imagined that standing my ground on basic safety protocols would lead to the most terrifying and ultimately empowering confrontation of my career. When CEO Bradley Morrison cornered me by the helicopter landing pad that gray Seattle morning, his face twisted with rage just inches from mine, I could feel his hot breath as he hissed those words that would change everything. He threatened my job, my livelihood, my ability to provide for my 6-year-old daughter Emma if I made him wait another second for flight clearance during an incoming storm. My name is Sue. And 3 years ago, I thought landing this position as helicopter landing operations coordinator at Emerald Aviation was the answer to my prayers. After my divorce from Emma's father and my transition out of the Air Force, I needed stability more than anything. The job paid $45,000 annually, which barely covered our small apartment in Ballard and Emma's childcare, but it utilized my military logistics training and gave me something I desperately craved: purpose. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I arrived at the downtown Seattle private aviation facility at 6:30, coffee in hand, ready to manage the day's helicopter traffic for our wealthy clientele. The facility served tech executives, real estate moguls, and venture capitalists who needed quick transport to meetings across the Pacific Northwest. My role was ensuring every takeoff and landing met strict Federal Aviation Administration safety standards, regardless of how important someone believed their business was. The weather forecast showed concerning developments. A storm system was moving in from the Pacific, bringing winds that would gust up to 35 miles per hour and visibility that would drop to less than 2 miles by noon. I updated our landing protocols accordingly, knowing that any helicopter operations after 11:30 would need special clearance and extended safety checks. Bradley Morrison arrived at 9:45 in his black Tesla, stepping out in an expensive navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His helicopter was scheduled for a 10:15 departure to Vancouver for what he'd described as a critical business meeting. I'd worked with Bradley several times before, and he always struck me as demanding but generally reasonable. That morning, however, something was different about his energy. His movements were sharp, agitated, and he kept checking his platinum watch every few minutes.
"Sue, I need to be in the air in 20 minutes.
He announced as he approached my station near the landing pad. "There's been a change to my schedule." I pulled up the weather data on my computer screen and showed him the incoming storm information.
"Mr. Morrison, I understand the urgency, but we're looking at deteriorating conditions. The standard pre-flight safety check will take 20 minutes minimum, and given the wind patterns, I'd recommend postponing until after 1 o'clock when the system passes."
His jaw tightened.
"That's not an option. I have investors flying in from Tokyo specifically for this meeting. Moving it would cost my company millions of dollars."
I maintained my professional composure while explaining the mandatory protocols.
"Sir, I appreciate the business importance, but FAA regulations require comprehensive safety checks when weather conditions are marginal. The wind shear patterns alone make immediate departure inadvisable."
Bradley stepped closer to my workstation, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper.
"Let me explain something to you, Sue. I've built 3 companies from the ground up. I employ over 2,000 people. I don't have time for bureaucratic delays from someone who makes less in a year than I spend on wine."
The personal attack stung, but I'd dealt with difficult clients before.
"Mr. Morrison's safety isn't negotiable. These protocols exist because marginal weather has caused helicopter accidents. I'm not willing to risk your life or anyone else's for a shortened timeline."
His face flushed red.
"Risk my life? I've been flying helicopters for 15 years. I know more about aviation than you'll ever learn pushing papers at a desk."
I pulled out the meteorological printouts and pointed to the specific data points.
"The visibility is dropping faster than predicted. Wind patterns show severe turbulence developing along your flight path. Even experienced pilots avoid these conditions.
Bradley grabbed my clipboard from my hands, his knuckles white with tension.
You're questioning my competence. You think some divorced single mother working an entry-level job knows better than a CEO who's logged over 3,000 flight hours.
The mention of my personal situation caught me off guard. How did he know about my divorce? I kept my private life completely separate from work, never discussing my relationship status with clients. A cold realization crept up my spine as I wondered what else he might know about my circumstances.
My personal life isn't relevant to safety protocols, Mr. Morrison, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The weather conditions are deteriorating, and I won't compromise on procedures that protect everyone involved. He backed me against the equipment shed, using his 6-foot height to loom over my 5'4" frame. You want to talk about what's relevant? Let's discuss your recent child custody hearing. How's that going for you, Sue? My blood turned to ice. The custody hearing was supposed to be confidential. Emma's father had been pushing for joint custody, claiming my job was too demanding and unpredictable for stable parenting. The court case was still ongoing, and losing would devastate both Emma and me. The fact that Bradley somehow knew these intimate details felt like a violation of everything I held sacred.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I managed, though my voice betrayed my shock.
Bradley smiled coldly.
Of course you do. Struggling financially, working irregular hours, dealing with an ex-husband who thinks you're an unfit mother. It would be terrible if someone in my position happened to make some calls to the right people, maybe share some concerns about your professional judgment. Judges take employment stability very seriously in custody cases.
The threat hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just questioning my competence anymore. He was threatening to destroy my relationship with my daughter. The man was using my deepest vulnerability as leverage to force me into compromising safety standards. I felt trapped between protecting my child and protecting the principles that made me who I was. The weight of Bradley's threat settled into my chest like a stone. How had he gained access to information about my custody case? I'd been meticulous about keeping my work and personal lives separate, never mentioning family struggles to colleagues or clients. The realization that this powerful man had researched my vulnerabilities and planned this confrontation made my skin crawl. I stepped away from the equipment shed, creating distance between us while my mind raced. My Air Force training had taught me to stay calm under pressure and document everything when facing hostile situations. Without making it obvious, I reached into my pocket and activated the voice recording app on my phone.
Mr. Morrison, I need you to understand that weather conditions take priority over any business timeline, I said, speaking clearly for the recording. Your safety and the safety of others cannot be compromised. He began pacing in tight circles near the landing pad, periodically stopping to check his watch and make agitated phone calls. During one conversation, I overheard him telling someone that he was dealing with incompetent staff, and that heads would roll if his meeting was delayed. The venom in his voice when he mentioned staff made it clear he was referring to me.
Tommy Rodriguez, our ground crew chief and fellow veteran, approached my station carrying fuel testing equipment. He'd worked at Emerald Aviation for 8 years and had never seen me appear rattled by a difficult client. Tommy noticed my tense posture and the way Bradley was aggressively gesturing while talking on his phone.
Everything okay over here, Sue?
Tommy asked quietly, setting down his equipment.
Disagreement about departure timing due to weather conditions,
I replied, keeping my voice professional in case Bradley could hear us. Tommy glanced at the meteorological data on my screen and frowned.
Those wind patterns look nasty. I wouldn't want to be up there in the next few hours.
Bradley finished his phone call and stormed back toward my workstation.
I just spoke with my pilot. He's confident about handling the conditions. We're departing in 10 minutes whether you sign off or not.
Sir, my clearance is legally required for takeoff, I explained. The pilot cannot override safety protocols without proper authorization.
Then authorize it!
Bradley shouted loud enough that other ground crew members turned to look.
Stop wasting my time with your bureaucratic power trip.
I pulled up the company's safety manual on my computer and turned the screen toward him.
These aren't arbitrary rules, Mr. Morrison. They're federal requirements designed to prevent accidents. I could lose my license and face criminal charges if I approve unsafe conditions.
Bradley leaned over my desk, invading my personal space again.
And you could lose your daughter if you don't approve this flight. I'm giving you a choice here, Sue. Make the smart decision.
The explicit threat to my custody case combined with his physical intimidation crossed every line of acceptable behavior. I discreetly adjusted my phone to ensure it was capturing everything clearly. Tommy had moved closer to my station, obviously concerned about the escalating confrontation. Mr. Morrison, I need you to step back from my workstation, I said firmly. Physical intimidation of aviation personnel is a federal offense. He laughed harshly.
Intimidation. I'm simply having a business conversation with an employee who seems confused about priorities.
Maybe you'd prefer to have this discussion with my lawyers instead of me. The mention of lawyers triggered another wave of anxiety about my custody case, but also sparked my anger. This man was exploiting my love for my daughter to force me into potentially deadly negligence. I thought about Emma waiting for me at school pickup that afternoon, trusting that her mother would always make the right choices to keep people safe.
The answer is no, Mr. Morrison,
I stated clearly.
I will not approve takeoff until conditions improve, or you provide documentation of special authorization from FAA Regional Headquarters.
Bradley's face contorted with rage. He grabbed my clipboard again, this time yanking it hard enough that I had to grab my desk to maintain balance. Tommy immediately stepped forward.
Hey, that's enough,
Tommy said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with dangerous situations.
You need to step away from Sue right now. This doesn't concern you.
Bradley snapped at Tommy, but he did release my clipboard.
Workplace harassment concerns all of us,
Tommy replied evenly.
Sue's doing her job correctly and you're interfering with safety operations.
I seized the moment to document the incident. Opening my computer's incident reporting system, I began typing a detailed account of Bradley's behavior, including timestamps and direct quotes. The system automatically notified Janet Walsh, my supervisor, and Marcus Chen, the company's legal counsel. Bradley noticed me typing, and his expression shifted from anger to concern.
What are you doing?
Documenting this interaction as required by company policy, I replied without looking up from my screen. All safety disputes must be recorded for legal and insurance purposes.
Delete that report immediately,
Bradley demanded. I can't delete official safety documentation, I explained. It's part of the permanent record and automatically copied to federal databases. The color drained from Bradley's face as he realized the implications. His threats and intimidation were now part of an official record that would be reviewed by multiple agencies. Janet arrived within minutes, having received the automated notification on her phone.
What's the situation here?
Janet asked, looking between Bradley's agitated state and my professional demeanor.
Mr. Morrison is requesting immediate takeoff clearance despite deteriorating weather conditions,
I explained. I've declined to approve the flight based on current FAA safety standards. Janet reviewed the meteorological data and nodded approvingly.
Sue's assessment is correct. These conditions require extended safety protocols at minimum.
Bradley turned his attention to Janet, apparently believing that appealing to my supervisor might override my decision. This is costing my company significant money. Surely there's some flexibility in your procedures for valued clients.
Our procedures are designed to keep valued clients alive,
Janet replied diplomatically but firmly. We can expedite the safety check once conditions improve, but we won't compromise on fundamental requirements. As Janet spoke with Bradley, I received a text message from Marcus requesting additional details about the incident. I quickly typed out the key points, including Bradley's knowledge of my custody case and his explicit threats. Marcus responded immediately, asking me to save all recordings and documentation for legal review. The most disturbing revelation came when I checked my computer's client history. Bradley's file showed multiple complaints from female employees over the past 18 months. Comments included demanding behavior, inappropriate personal questions, and excessive pressure tactics. A pattern was emerging that suggested I wasn't his first target. Marcus arrived at the landing pad 30 minutes later, carrying a legal pad and wearing the serious expression he reserved for potential litigation issues. He spoke privately with Janet while I continued monitoring weather conditions and processing other client requests.
"Sue, could you walk me through exactly what happened this morning?"
Marcus asked when he approached my station. I provided a detailed chronological account while Bradley waited near his helicopter, obviously frustrated by the delay and the attention his behavior had attracted. Several other employees had gathered at a respectful distance, curious about the unusual commotion.
"Mr. Morrison mentioned personal information about your family situation," Marcus noted. "How might he have accessed that information?"
I have no idea, I replied honestly. I've never discussed my custody case at work. That information should be completely confidential. Marcus frowned and made several notes.
"We'll need to investigate how client access to employee records. That type of information breach could represent a serious privacy violation."
The implications were becoming clearer. Bradley hadn't simply lost his temper during a business disagreement. He had deliberately researched my personal vulnerabilities and planned this confrontation to exploit them. The level of calculation behind his behavior was far more disturbing than a simple outburst.
"There's something else," I told Marcus quietly. "I recorded our conversation when he started making threats about my daughter."
Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "You have audio documentation? Clear recording of him threatening to interfere with my custody case if I don't approve his flight." I confirmed. "Sue, that recording could be crucial evidence if this situation escalates legally," Marcus said. "Please don't delete anything from your phone or computer until we determine next steps." As we spoke, Bradley's pilot arrived and began reviewing weather conditions independently. After examining the meteorological data and consulting with air traffic control, the pilot approached Bradley with obvious reluctance.
"Sir, I have to agree with the ground operations assessment," the pilot told Bradley. "Conditions are deteriorating faster than predicted. I'd recommend postponing until this afternoon."
Bradley's last hope for immediate departure had evaporated. Even his own pilot was confirming that my safety assessment was correct. The vindication felt good, but I knew this confrontation was far from over. Men like Bradley Morrison didn't accept defeat gracefully, especially when their behavior had been officially documented and potentially recorded. Over the following days, Marcus's investigation into how Bradley accessed my personal information revealed disturbing truths about systematic privacy violations within our company. The initial discovery came when our IT department found unauthorized access attempts to the human resources database from Bradley's executive login credentials. Detective Lisa Rodriguez from the Seattle Police Department's Workplace Crimes Unit contacted me 3 days after the incident. Apparently, Marcus had reported Bradley's threats as potential criminal harassment triggering an official investigation. Detective Rodriguez was an experienced investigator who specialized in cases involving workplace intimidation and abuse of power.
"Ms. Sue, I understand you have recordings of threatening statements made by Mr. Morrison," Detective Rodriguez said when we met at the police station. "These types of cases often involve patterns of behavior rather than isolated incidents." I provided Detective Rodriguez with copies of my audio recordings, the incident report, and all documentation from the confrontation. She listened to the recordings twice, taking detailed notes about specific threats and intimidation tactics. The part where he mentions your custody case is particularly concerning, Detective Rodriguez observed. That suggests premeditation and deliberate targeting based on personal vulnerabilities. How long has he been a client of your company? About 2 years, I replied. I've handled his flights maybe a dozen times, and he was always demanding but never threatening until that morning. Detective Rodriguez explained that her investigation would examine whether Bradley's behavior constituted criminal harassment under Washington state law. She also mentioned that federal authorities might become involved if his actions interfered with aviation safety protocols. The breakthrough in understanding Bradley's behavior came from an unexpected source. Amanda Walsh, a former Emerald Aviation employee, contacted Detective Rodriguez after hearing about the investigation through industry contacts. Amanda had worked in our accounting department until 6 months earlier when she'd abruptly resigned, citing hostile work environment. Amanda's story revealed a chilling pattern. Bradley had targeted her when she'd questioned discrepancies in helicopter maintenance billing. Like me, Amanda was a single mother dealing with financial struggles. Bradley had somehow learned about her son's special education needs, and the associated costs then used that information to pressure her into overlooking questionable expense reports. He knew everything about my situation, Amanda told Detective Rodriguez and me during a recorded interview. My son's autism therapy costs my student loan payments, even details about my ex-husband's irregular child support. When I asked questions about maintenance bills that seemed inflated, Bradley arranged a private meeting. Amanda described how Bradley had cornered her in the company conference room after hours, suggesting that employees who caused problems for valued clients might find themselves unemployed and unable to afford their children's medical care. The similarities to my experience were unmistakable. I resigned the next week, Amanda continued. I couldn't afford to lose my job, but I also couldn't keep working somewhere that felt unsafe. I've been struggling financially ever since, but at least I can sleep at night. Detective Rodriguez documented Amanda's testimony and began investigating other former employees who'd left the company under similar circumstances. The pattern that emerged was systematic and calculated. Bradley had been identifying female employees with financial vulnerabilities, then exploiting those vulnerabilities to suppress questions about his business activities. The investigation took a significant turn when our IT department discovered that Bradley had been accessing confidential employee files for over 18 months. His executive login credentials had been used to view personal information, including emergency contacts, insurance beneficiaries, and financial hardship requests. He'd essentially been conducting surveillance on company employees to identify potential targets. Marcus called me into his office to discuss the expanding scope of the investigation. Sue, we're looking at possible violations of federal privacy laws, harassment statutes, and potentially more serious charges. Your decision to document everything and record his threats may have uncovered criminal behavior that's been happening for quite some time. The most shocking discovery came when Detective Rodriguez found evidence that Bradley had been hiring private investigators to gather additional information about targeted employees. Phone records showed payments to a private investigation firm that specialized in background checks and surveillance services. The depth of his surveillance activities was staggering. He wasn't just accessing company files, Detective Rodriguez explained. He was commissioning detailed reports about employees' family situations, financial struggles, legal issues, and personal relationships. This represents a level of premeditation that goes far beyond workplace harassment. I felt violated, knowing that strangers had been investigating my life, documenting my struggles, and reporting details about Emma to someone who wanted to use that information against me. The realization that my privacy had been systematically invaded for months made me feel physically sick.
The investigation expanded when Detective Rodriguez found communications between Bradley and the private investigation firm discussing pressure points for various employees. The language in these communications was calculated and predatory, treating company employees like targets to be manipulated rather than people to be respected. Dr. Sarah Chen, the company's consulting psychiatrist who handled employee wellness programs, reviewed the investigation findings and provided professional insight into Bradley's behavior patterns. "This represents classic predatory targeting," Dr. Chen explained. "He's identifying individuals with vulnerabilities, then systematically exploiting those vulnerabilities to maintain control and silence potential opposition." Dr. Chen's analysis helped me understand that Bradley's behavior toward me wasn't personal retaliation for my safety decision. I was simply the latest target in a pattern of systematic employee manipulation that had been happening for over a year. The knowledge that other women had suffered similar treatment was heartbreaking, but it also meant I wasn't facing this alone. The investigation reached a crucial turning point when Detective Rodriguez discovered financial irregularities in Bradley's helicopter maintenance contracts. Amanda's original questions about inflated billing had been legitimate concerns about potential fraud. Bradley's intimidation campaign had been designed to suppress employee scrutiny of questionable business practices. "Your colleague Amanda was right to be suspicious," Detective Rodriguez told me. "We're finding evidence of systematic overbilling, falsified maintenance records, and possible kickback arrangements with certain service providers." Bradley wasn't just harassing employees for personal satisfaction. He was protecting criminal activity. The revelation that Bradley's behavior was connected to financial crimes added federal implications to the investigation. The FBI's white-collar crime division became involved, expanding the scope beyond workplace harassment into potential fraud and racketeering charges. I began to understand that my refusal to compromise safety protocols had threatened more than just Bradley's business meeting. My insistence on proper documentation and official procedures had put him at risk of additional scrutiny that could expose his broader criminal activities. The intensity of his intimidation made sense when viewed as protection of a criminal enterprise rather than simple executive impatience. Federal investigators requested copies of all my documentation and recordings. Agent Kevin Burke from the FBI's Seattle field office explained that my evidence could be crucial in building a comprehensive case against Bradley and potentially other co-conspirators. "Your attention to detail and systematic documentation has provided us with a foundation for investigating what appears to be extensive criminal activity," Agent Burke told me. "Your decision to stand firm on safety protocols may have prevented not just aviation accidents, but also protected other employees from continued victimization." The knowledge that my actions had broader implications beyond my immediate situation was both empowering and overwhelming. I'd simply been trying to do my job correctly and protect my daughter, but somehow those basic principles had put me at the center of a major criminal investigation. 2 weeks after the initial incident, Agent Burke approached me with an unusual request. The FBI wanted me to participate in a controlled operation designed to gather additional evidence against Bradley. They'd discovered that his criminal activities extended beyond employee harassment into systematic fraud involving federal aviation contracts. "We need documented evidence of Bradley attempting to corrupt safety protocols," Agent Burke explained. "Your position as landing operations coordinator makes you ideally placed to observe and record any attempts to bypass mandatory procedures." The plan involved me wearing a concealed recording device during Bradley's next scheduled helicopter operation. Federal investigators had learned that Bradley was planning another urgent flight, this time to a business meeting in Portland that could involve illegal financial transactions with offshore accounts. I agreed to participate despite my nervousness about direct confrontation with Bradley. The FBI assured me that surveillance teams would be positioned nearby and that I'd have immediate backup if the situation became dangerous. My motivation was simple: preventing Bradley from continuing to victimize other employees and potentially causing aviation accidents through safety violations. Bradley arrived at Emerald Aviation the following Tuesday with the same aggressive energy I'd witnessed during our previous confrontation. This time, however, I was prepared. The recording device was concealed in my company badge, and I'd memorized specific questions designed to elicit incriminating responses.
"Sue, I need immediate clearance for Portland departure," Bradley announced as he approached my workstation. "I trust we won't have the same communication problems we experienced last time."
"Of course, Mr. Morrison," I replied professionally. "I just need to complete the standard safety verification process." Bradley's demeanor was noticeably different. Gone was the explosive anger from our previous interaction. Instead, he seemed calculating and controlled, as if he'd planned this conversation carefully. The change in his approach was actually more unsettling than his previous aggression.
"I've been thinking about our last conversation," Bradley said quietly. "Perhaps I was unclear about the business realities we're all facing. This company depends on client satisfaction, and my continued business is important for everyone's employment security." The veiled threat was obvious, but delivered with superficial politeness. I continued my safety checklist while responding naturally to keep him talking for the recording. "Safety protocols are designed to protect everyone involved," I replied. "I'm sure you understand the importance of following proper procedures." Bradley leaned against my workstation, positioning himself so that other employees couldn't easily overhear our conversation. "Sometimes proper procedures need to be adapted to real-world circumstances. I'm prepared to make it worth your while to show some flexibility." The offer of what sounded like a bribe was exactly what federal investigators needed to hear. I continued my work while encouraging him to elaborate. "I'm not sure what you mean by flexibility, Mr. Morrison," I said. "Could you be more specific about what you're looking for?" Bradley glanced around to ensure privacy, then spoke more directly. "I understand you're facing financial pressures with your custody situation.
Legal fees can be expensive, and single mothers often struggle with unexpected costs. I'm in a position to help with those challenges if we can work together on scheduling efficiency. The explicit connection between financial assistance and compromising safety protocols was precisely the type of corruption federal investigators needed to document. I felt sick knowing that Bradley was again exploiting my love for Emma, but I also felt empowered knowing that his words were being recorded for law enforcement.
"Are you suggesting that my personal financial situation should influence aviation safety decisions?"
I asked clearly. Bradley smiled coldly.
"I'm suggesting that smart people understand how business relationships work. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Everybody wins when we cooperate instead of creating unnecessary obstacles."
Before I could respond, Tommy approached my workstation carrying maintenance reports. His presence seemed to make Bradley uncomfortable, and I realized that previous conversations had occurred when I was isolated. Bradley's predatory behavior required privacy to be effective.
"Sue, I need your signature on the fuel system inspection,"
Tommy said, obviously noting Bradley's proximity to my desk. As I reviewed the maintenance reports, I noticed discrepancies in the helicopter service records. Several maintenance items that should have been completed the previous week were marked as pending, but Bradley's aircraft was scheduled for immediate departure. Federal law required all maintenance to be current before commercial helicopter operations.
"Mr. Morrison, there appear to be outstanding maintenance items on your aircraft," I said, showing him the reports. "I can't approve departure until these inspections are completed."
Bradley's carefully controlled demeanor cracked slightly.
"Those maintenance items are minor issues that don't affect flight safety. My pilot has already reviewed everything and confirmed the aircraft is airworthy.
Federal regulations require certified mechanic approval for all maintenance items, I explained. Pilot approval alone isn't sufficient for commercial operations. Bradley's frustration was evident, but he was clearly trying to maintain his composure for the recording he didn't know was happening. Sue, you're creating problems where none exist. These maintenance reports are bureaucratic paperwork that has nothing to do with actual safety. I pulled up the specific maintenance requirements on my computer and showed him the detailed checklist. Hydraulic system inspection, avionics calibration, and rotor balance verification are all marked as incomplete. These are serious safety items that directly affect flight operations. I'll take responsibility for any mechanical issues, Bradley said dismissively. I'm willing to sign waivers absolving the company of liability. Individual waivers can't override federal safety regulations, I replied. The FAA requires corporate compliance regardless of client preferences. Bradley's mask of professionalism finally slipped completely. Listen carefully, Sue. I've been patient with your obstinate behavior, but my patience has limits. You will approve this flight immediately, or you will find yourself unemployed and unable to provide for your daughter. The explicit threat was delivered with quiet intensity that was even more chilling than his previous shouting. Tommy had moved closer to my workstation, obviously concerned about Bradley's body language and tone. Mr. Morrison threatening aviation personnel is a federal crime, I stated clearly for the recording. I'm documenting this conversation according to company policy. Bradley realized that he'd crossed legal lines and attempted to backtrack. That wasn't a threat. It was a business observation about performance standards. Employees who can't meet client needs typically don't remain employed long-term. You specifically mentioned my daughter and my employment status in the context of demanding that I ignore safety regulations, I replied. That constitutes workplace intimidation. The conversation was interrupted by Janet's arrival at my workstation. She'd been monitoring the situation remotely as part of the FBI operation and had observed Bradley's increasingly aggressive behavior on security cameras. Mr. Morrison, I understand there's a disagreement about maintenance requirements, Janet said diplomatically. Perhaps we could discuss alternative solutions that address your scheduling needs while maintaining safety compliance. Bradley turned his attention to Janet, apparently believing he could manipulate her more easily than me. Your employee seems confused about the company's customer service priorities. I'm simply asking for reasonable accommodation of a minor scheduling adjustment. Janet reviewed the maintenance reports and shook her head. These aren't minor issues, Mr. Morrison. Incomplete hydraulic inspections represent serious safety concerns that could result in catastrophic mechanical failure. I've been flying helicopters for 15 years without incident, Bradley protested. I know more about aircraft safety than bureaucrats with clipboards. Experience doesn't substitute for current maintenance verification, Janet replied firmly. Our insurance and federal certification require full compliance with inspection schedules. Bradley's final attempt at manipulation revealed the depth of his corruption. Janet, I'm prepared to increase my annual contract value by 20% if we can resolve this scheduling flexibility issue. That additional revenue would support salary increases for your entire department. The attempted bribery of my supervisor was captured clearly on the FBI recording device. Agent Burke had explained that corruption of aviation safety officials carried severe federal penalties, especially when it involved commercial helicopter operations in major metropolitan areas. Our safety standards aren't for sale, Mr. Morrison, Janet replied without hesitation. I'm afraid you'll need to postpone your departure until all maintenance items are completed properly. Bradley's expression shifted from frustration to something approaching panic. This delay will cost me millions of dollars in lost business opportunities. You people don't seem to understand the financial implications of your bureaucratic inflexibility. We understand that cutting corners on safety has killed people, Tommy interjected. Money doesn't mean much to families who lose loved ones in preventable accidents. The comment about preventable accidents seemed to trigger something in Bradley's demeanor. For the first time, he appeared genuinely concerned about the consequences of his behavior rather than simply angry about not getting his way. "Fine," Bradley said tersely. "Complete your precious maintenance checks. But this delay will have consequences for everyone involved." The veiled threat was his final mistake. Agent Burke later explained that Bradley's pattern of intimidation, attempted bribery, and threats against federal safety protocols provided sufficient evidence for multiple felony charges under federal aviation safety laws. Within hours of Bradley's departure from Emerald Aviation, the FBI operation shifted into high gear. Agent Burke contacted me to confirm that the recording device had captured everything clearly, including Bradley's attempted bribery and continued threats against my family. The evidence was immediately transmitted to federal prosecutors who were building a comprehensive case against Bradley's criminal enterprise. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Captain Robert Hayes from the FAA's Flight Standards District Office arrived at our facility the next morning. Captain Hayes was a veteran aviation safety inspector with 30 years of experience investigating violations of federal air regulations. His presence indicated that Bradley's case had attracted attention from the highest levels of aviation enforcement. "Ms. Sue, your documentation of safety protocol violations has raised serious concerns about systematic corruption in commercial helicopter operations," Captain Hayes explained. "We're launching a comprehensive review of all aircraft associated with Mr. Morrison's business activities." The FAA investigation revealed that Bradley's safety violations extended far beyond our facility. Records showed a pattern of pressuring mechanics to sign off on incomplete inspections, bribing maintenance supervisors to falsify records, and threatening employees who questioned questionable maintenance practices. The scope of his corruption was staggering. Director Michelle Park, a member of Emerald Aviation's board of directors, called an emergency meeting to address the criminal investigation and its implications for the company. Director Park was a respected businesswoman who'd built her career on ethical practices and zero tolerance for corruption. Her involvement signaled that the company was taking the situation seriously at the highest levels. "The board has reviewed the FBI findings and made several immediate decisions," Director Park announced during a company-wide meeting. "First, Mr. Morrison's contract is terminated effective immediately. Second, we're implementing enhanced employee protection protocols to prevent future intimidation. Third, we're cooperating fully with all federal investigations." The company's swift response felt validating after weeks of uncertainty about whether my actions would be supported by management. Director Park personally thanked me for maintaining safety standards despite significant personal pressure and assured me that employee safety was the company's top priority. The investigation uncovered evidence that Bradley's corruption had nearly caused a catastrophic accident 3 months earlier. FAA records showed that he'd pressured mechanics to approve a helicopter with known hydraulic problems, resulting in an emergency landing that almost killed a family of 4. The near miss had been reported as mechanical failure rather than maintenance negligence, concealing Bradley's role in creating dangerous conditions. "Your refusal to compromise safety protocols may have prevented similar tragedies," Captain Hayes told me during a follow-up interview. "The maintenance discrepancies you documented were identical to problems that caused the previous emergency landing. Your attention to detail likely saved lives." The knowledge that my actions had protected innocent people from Bradley's reckless behavior was both empowering and sobering. I'd been focused on protecting my job and my relationship with Emma, but my dedication to proper procedures had apparently prevented aviation disasters. Federal investigators discovered that Bradley had been systematically falsifying maintenance records to reduce operational costs and increase profit margins. His helicopter operations had been generating millions of dollars in revenue while cutting corners on essential safety inspections. The savings from avoided maintenance was being diverted to offshore accounts to evade taxation and regulatory oversight. Agent Burke explained that Bradley's criminal enterprise involved multiple conspirators, including corrupt mechanics, bribed inspectors, and intimidated employees. The investigation was expanding to include RICO charges for operating a criminal organization designed to defraud federal aviation safety programs. Your case has become the foundation for dismantling an entire network of aviation safety corruption, Agent Burke told me. Bradley's intimidation tactics were designed to protect criminal activities that put thousands of people at risk. The personal vindication I felt was overshadowed by anger about the systematic nature of Bradley's crimes. He hadn't simply lost his temper during a business disagreement. He'd been operating a calculated criminal enterprise that exploited vulnerable employees and endangered innocent passengers. The depth of his corruption was breathtaking. Dr. Chen provided psychological analysis of Bradley's behavior patterns for federal prosecutors. Her evaluation revealed classic characteristics of sociopathic manipulation, including lack of empathy, exploitation of vulnerabilities, and systematic intimidation of potential threats to his control. The psychological profile supported charges of predatory criminal behavior rather than simple business misconduct. The investigation reached a critical milestone when federal agents raided Bradley's corporate offices and personal residences. The searches yielded extensive documentation of bribes, falsified records, and detailed surveillance files on dozens of employees across multiple companies. Bradley had been operating systematic corruption schemes for over 5 years. Evidence seized during the raids included recorded phone conversations where Bradley discussed eliminating obstacles to his business operations. The language in these recordings suggested that his intimidation campaign against me was part of a broader pattern of silencing employees who threatened to expose his criminal activities. He kept detailed files on every employee he'd targeted, Detective Rodriguez explained. Your case was just the most recent example of behavior he'd been perfecting for years. The documentation shows calculated predatory behavior designed to identify and exploit personal vulnerabilities. Federal prosecutors decided to pursue maximum charges, including racketeering, fraud, bribery, intimidation of federal safety officials, and endangering public safety. The evidence package included my recordings, Amanda's testimony, financial records seized during raids, and testimony from multiple employees across several companies. Judge Patricia Williams from the Federal District Court reviewed the evidence and concluded that Bradley represented a significant flight risk due to his offshore financial accounts and history of intimidating witnesses. She ordered him held without bail pending trial, citing concerns about potential witness tampering and continued criminal activity. The knowledge that Bradley was in federal custody provided enormous relief after weeks of anxiety about potential retaliation. Agent Burke assured me that federal marshals were monitoring his communications to prevent any attempts to intimidate witnesses or interfere with the ongoing investigation. My role as a key witness in the federal prosecution required extensive preparation with attorneys from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The prosecutors explained that my testimony would be crucial in demonstrating Bradley's pattern of intimidation and his systematic efforts to corrupt aviation safety protocols. Your case represents the clearest example of his criminal methods, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh explained. Your recordings and documentation provide definitive proof of his intimidation tactics and attempted corruption of federal safety regulations. The federal investigation's findings were shared with state authorities, resulting in additional charges related to privacy violations, workplace harassment, and criminal threats. The combination of federal and state charges meant that Bradley was facing potential imprisonment for decades, even if convicted on only a portion of the allegations. Director Park announced that Emerald Aviation would be implementing comprehensive reforms based on lessons learned from the Bradley Morrison investigation. The changes included enhanced employee protection protocols, independent safety oversight, and whistleblower protections designed to encourage reporting of suspicious activities. Sue's courage in standing firm on safety standards despite personal threats represents the kind of employee integrity we want to protect and encourage. Director Park stated during a press conference, "Her actions have made commercial aviation safer for everyone." 6 months after my confrontation with Bradley Morrison, I found myself sitting in a federal courthouse testifying before a grand jury about the systematic corruption and intimidation I'd witnessed. The prosecution team had prepared me thoroughly, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional impact of publicly recounting Bradley's threats against my daughter and my livelihood. The grand jury proceedings resulted in a comprehensive indictment charging Bradley with 23 federal crimes, including racketeering, fraud, bribery, intimidation of federal safety officials, and conspiracy to endanger public safety. The indictment named 17 co-conspirators and detailed criminal activities spanning over 5 years across multiple states. Bradley's arrest made national news as a symbol of corporate corruption in the aviation industry. News reports described him as a wealthy executive who'd systematically intimidated employees and corrupted safety protocols to increase profits while endangering innocent passengers. The coverage validated my decision to stand firm against his intimidation campaign. Amanda Walsh and I were interviewed by several news organizations about our experiences with Bradley's intimidation tactics. Speaking publicly about workplace harassment felt uncomfortable, but we both agreed that sharing our stories might encourage other victims to come forward and seek justice. Sue's courage in documenting everything and refusing to be intimidated probably saved lives, Amanda told a reporter from the Seattle Times. "I wish I'd been brave enough to fight back the way she did instead of just quitting and hoping the problem would go away." Amanda's comment made me realize that my decision to stay and fight, rather than simply finding another job, had broader implications beyond my immediate situation. By choosing to document Bradley's behavior and cooperate with investigators, I'd helped expose criminal activities that might have continued indefinitely if he'd succeeded in silencing me. The federal trial began 8 months after my initial confrontation with Bradley. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh presented a methodical case demonstrating Bradley's pattern of identifying vulnerable employees, researching their personal situations, then systematically exploiting those vulnerabilities to suppress questions about his criminal activities. My testimony was emotionally difficult, but legally crucial. I described Bradley's explicit threats against my custody case, his knowledge of confidential personal information, and his attempts to bribe me into compromising safety protocols. The federal jury listened intently as I played the audio recordings that had captured his intimidation tactics. He looked me in the eye and threatened to destroy my relationship with my 6-year-old daughter if I didn't approve an unsafe helicopter flight. I testified. No employee should ever face that choice between protecting their family and protecting public safety. Bradley's defense attorneys attempted to portray his behavior as standard business pressure rather than criminal intimidation. However, the extensive documentation of his surveillance activities, recorded threats, and systematic targeting of vulnerable employees made their arguments unconvincing to the jury. The prosecution's presentation of evidence seized during federal raids was devastating to Bradley's case. Financial records showed millions of dollars diverted from safety maintenance into offshore accounts. Recorded phone conversations revealed his calculating discussion of pressure points to manipulate employees. Surveillance files documented intimate details about dozens of workers' personal lives. Expert testimony from Dr. Chen described Bradley's behavior as classic predatory manipulation designed to identify and exploit psychological vulnerabilities. This wasn't anger management or poor communication skills, Dr. Chen explained to the jury. This was calculated psychological warfare against employees who posed threats to his criminal enterprise. The most compelling evidence came from testimony by Captain Hayes about the near-catastrophic helicopter accident that Bradley's maintenance corruption had caused 3 months before my confrontation with him. The pilot of that flight testified about hydraulic system failures that nearly killed his passengers, failures that resulted directly from Bradley's pressure to approve incomplete inspections. I barely managed to land safely with 4 passengers, including 2 small children, the pilot testified. If that hydraulic failure had occurred at higher altitude or over water, everyone aboard would have died. Mr. Morrison's cost-cutting nearly committed mass murder. Federal prosecutors demonstrated that Bradley's intimidation campaign against me was designed to prevent discovery of the maintenance fraud that had nearly caused the previous accident. My insistence on proper documentation and safety protocols threatened to expose criminal activities that had already endangered innocent lives. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on 21 of 23 federal charges. Bradley was convicted of racketeering, fraud, bribery, intimidation, of federal safety officials, conspiracy to endanger public safety, and multiple counts of witness intimidation. The verdicts carried potential sentences totaling over 40 years in federal prison. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for 2 months later, allowing time for victim impact statements from employees Bradley had intimidated and passengers who'd been endangered by his safety violations. The victim impact process provided closure for many people who'd suffered under Bradley's systematic abuse. My victim impact statement focused on the emotional trauma of having my love for Emma weaponized against me and the broader implications for aviation safety. Bradley Morrison tried to turn my devotion to my daughter into a tool for corrupting federal safety protocols, I wrote. His actions represented an attack not just on individual employees, but on the integrity of systems designed to protect innocent lives. The sentencing hearing was emotionally powerful, as multiple victims described how Bradley's intimidation had affected their lives and careers. Amanda testified about financial hardships she'd endured after fleeing his harassment. Other employees described anxiety, depression, and lost career opportunities resulting from his systematic abuse. Judge Williams sentenced Bradley to 32 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. She specifically noted that his targeting of vulnerable single mothers represented particularly egregious criminal behavior that warranted maximum punishment under federal sentencing guidelines. Mr. Morrison exploited the deepest vulnerabilities of dedicated employees to protect criminal activities that endangered innocent lives. Judge Williams stated during sentencing, "His calculated cruelty toward working mothers trying to support their children represents the worst aspects of predatory behavior disguised as business leadership." Bradley's assets were seized under federal forfeiture laws and used to establish a victim compensation fund for employees he'd harassed and passengers who'd been endangered by his safety violations. The fund provided financial assistance for therapy, legal fees, and career rehabilitation for people affected by his crimes. Emerald Aviation underwent comprehensive restructuring under Director Park's leadership. The company implemented enhanced safety protocols, independent oversight mechanisms, and employee protection systems designed to prevent future corruption. My role in exposing Bradley's crimes led to my promotion to Director of Safety Operations with a substantial salary increase. The promotion meant financial stability for Emma and me for the first time since my divorce. More importantly, it meant that my dedication to safety protocols was recognized and valued by company leadership. The position allowed me to implement systemic changes that would protect other employees from experiencing the intimidation I'd endured. My custody case was resolved in my favor when Emma's father withdrew his petition after learning about the federal prosecution. The public vindication of my professional competence and personal integrity undermined his arguments about my fitness as a parent. Emma and I could finally move forward without the constant anxiety about potential custody loss. The resolution of the custody case felt like the final piece of justice in a situation that had threatened to destroy everything I valued. Bradley's attempt to use my love for Emma against me had ultimately strengthened our relationship and secured our future together. Professional recognition for my actions came from multiple aviation safety organizations. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association presented me with their safety award for exceptional courage in maintaining safety standards despite personal threats and systematic intimidation. The recognition validated my belief that safety protocols must never be compromised regardless of external pressures. Speaking engagements at aviation safety conferences provided opportunities to share lessons learned from the Bradley Morrison case. My presentations focused on recognizing and reporting predatory behavior in workplace settings and the importance of systematic documentation when facing intimidation campaigns. Trust your training, document everything, and remember that bullies only have the power we give them, I told audiences at safety conferences. Standing up to corruption might feel lonely at first, but truth has a way of attracting allies and exposing wrongdoing. The positive response to my speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities, helping other aviation companies develop employee protection protocols and safety reporting systems. The work felt meaningful because it helped prevent other employees from experiencing the intimidation and harassment I'd endured. Tommy and I had developed a close friendship during the investigation and trial proceedings. His support during my confrontations with Bradley had been crucial, and his witness testimony had helped establish the threatening nature of Bradley's behavior. Our shared commitment to aviation safety provided a foundation for mutual respect and growing affection. 1 year after my initial confrontation with Bradley Morrison, Tommy and I were engaged to be married. Emma adored her future stepfather, and our blended family represented the positive future that Bradley had tried to destroy through his intimidation campaign. His attempts to weaponize my vulnerabilities had ultimately led to strength, love, and professional success. 2 years have passed since that gray Seattle morning when Bradley Morrison cornered me by the helicopter landing pad and threatened to destroy my life if I didn't compromise federal safety protocols. As I write this, Emma is 8 years old and thriving in 3rd grade, proud to tell her classmates that her mother helped catch a criminal who was endangering airplane passengers. Tommy and I have been married for 6 months, and our home is filled with laughter, love, and the kind of security I'd never imagined possible during those dark days when my future seemed so uncertain. Bradley Morrison is serving his 32-year federal prison sentence and will be eligible for release when he's 77 years old. Appeals of his conviction have been unsuccessful, and federal authorities continue investigating other companies where he may have operated similar corruption schemes. Justice was served comprehensively, but more importantly, systematic changes were implemented to prevent future predatory behavior. Emerald Aviation has become an industry leader in employee protection and safety protocols. Under Director Park's leadership and my oversight as Director of Safety Operations, we've developed comprehensive training programs that help employees recognize and report intimidation, harassment, and attempts to corrupt safety procedures. Our model has been adopted by aviation companies across the country. The Employee Compensation Fund established with Bradley's seized assets has provided over $2 million in assistance to victims of his harassment and passengers endangered by his safety violations. Amanda Walsh used her compensation to complete nursing school and now works in pediatric care, having found healing through helping children who've experienced trauma. My speaking engagements have expanded beyond aviation safety to include workplace harassment prevention and employee empowerment seminars. Sharing my story with women facing similar intimidation has become deeply meaningful work that provides hope for people who feel trapped in impossible situations. The most important lesson I learned is that documentation defeats intimidation. I tell audiences, when someone threatens you, record everything. When someone lies about you, preserve the truth. When someone exploits your vulnerabilities, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, but choosing to do what's right despite being afraid. Dr. Chen has continued providing psychological analysis of predatory workplace behavior, and her research based on the Bradley Morrison case has helped develop screening tools for identifying potentially dangerous supervisors and executives. Her work has contributed to policy changes at the federal level regarding background checks for aviation industry leadership positions. Detective Rodriguez was promoted to sergeant and now leads a specialized unit investigating workplace crimes and predatory behavior in professional settings. She credits our collaboration on the Bradley Morrison case with helping her understand how systematically criminals can exploit workplace hierarchies to silence victims and protect illegal activities. Sue's case showed us that workplace harassment often conceals much more serious criminal behavior, Detective Rodriguez explained in a recent interview. When we investigate intimidation complaints thoroughly, we frequently discover fraud safety violations and systematic abuse that affects entire organizations. Agent Burke has used the Bradley Morrison investigation as a model case for training federal investigators about recognizing and prosecuting corruption in regulated industries. The techniques developed during our collaboration have been applied to investigating corruption in healthcare, transportation, and financial services, where safety regulations protect public welfare. Captain Hayes has implemented new FAA protocols for investigating reports of safety intimidation based on lessons learned from Bradley's systematic corruption. Aviation safety inspectors now receive specialized training in recognizing predatory behavior patterns and protecting employees who report safety violations. The Morrison case demonstrated that corruption of safety protocols often begins with intimidation of individual employees, Captain Hayes explained. By protecting whistleblowers and investigating harassment complaints aggressively, we can prevent systematic safety violations before they cause accidents. My relationship with Tommy has flourished into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and commitment to protecting others through our work. He recently completed training to become a safety inspector himself, motivated by our experiences with Bradley's corruption to pursue a career in aviation oversight and protection. Emma has grown into a confident, curious child who understands that her mother stood up to a bad person who was trying to hurt other families. Her pride in my actions has taught me that courage is often about modeling principles for the next generation rather than just solving immediate problems. "Mommy, you were like a superhero but without a cape," Emma told me recently. "You used your brain and your voice instead of superpowers to stop the bad guy from hurting people." The financial security provided by my promotion and consulting work has eliminated the vulnerabilities that Bradley tried to exploit. Emma and I live in a beautiful home in a safe neighborhood, and I've established education savings accounts that will ensure her future opportunities regardless of any challenges we might face. Professional recognition has continued with additional safety awards and invitations to serve on federal advisory committees reviewing aviation safety protocols.
The work keeps me connected to ongoing efforts to prevent the type of systematic corruption that Bradley Morrison represented. The most meaningful recognition comes from letters I receive from women who found courage to report harassment and intimidation after hearing my story. Knowing that my experience has helped others find their voices and protect themselves makes every difficult moment of the investigation and trial worthwhile. "Your story gave me hope that fighting back was possible," wrote one woman who'd exposed financial fraud at her company. "Watching you refuse to be silenced inspired me to document everything and report criminal behavior that was harming patients at our medical facility." These letters remind me that individual acts of courage can have ripple effects far beyond immediate circumstances. By choosing to stand firm on principles rather than submit to intimidation, each of us can contribute to broader cultural changes that protect vulnerable people and maintain ethical standards. The Bradley Morrison case has become a teaching tool in business schools and law enforcement academies as an example of how systematic documentation can defeat even well-funded and sophisticated criminal enterprises. Students learn that ordinary employees with extraordinary courage can expose corruption that threatens public safety. Looking back on that terrifying morning when Bradley threatened my livelihood and my relationship with Emma, I'm grateful for the fear that motivated me to document everything carefully. Without audio recordings and systematic incident reports, his intimidation campaign might have succeeded in silencing me and allowing his criminal activities to continue. The experience taught me that predators depend on isolation, shame, and fear to maintain control over their victims. When we shine light on their behavior through documentation and testimony, their power evaporates. Truth has a weight that ultimately overcomes lies, manipulation, and intimidation. My advice to anyone facing workplace harassment or intimidation is simple. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that you're not alone. Criminal behavior often appears overwhelming when you're facing it alone, but it becomes manageable when you connect with others who share your values and commitment to justice. The most profound lesson from my experience is that protecting others often requires accepting personal risk, but the rewards of integrity far exceed the costs of compromise. When I refused to approve Bradley's unsafe flight despite his threats, I was protecting not just unknown passengers, but also my own ability to sleep peacefully, knowing I'd done the right thing. Emma will grow up in a world where her mother chose courage over comfort, principles over convenience, and protection of others over protection of self. Those choices have created a legacy of integrity that will influence her own decisions when she faces difficult situations in her future. The sweet quiet I heard when Bradley realized that his threats and intimidation couldn't override federal safety systems represents the sound of justice prevailing over corruption. It's a sound that echoes through courtrooms, corporate boardrooms, and aviation facilities where dedicated employees continue choosing safety over expediency every single day. In closing, I want to ask you something that I think about often. Have you ever faced a situation where someone tried to use your deepest vulnerabilities against you to force you into compromising your principles? How did you find the strength to stand firm, or what would you do differently if faced with similar intimidation? The choices we make in those moments define not just our immediate futures, but the kind of world we're creating for our children and the people we love. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting the belief that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary justice when they refuse to be silenced. I hope my experience encourages you to trust your own courage, document everything carefully, and remember that truth ultimately defeats even the most sophisticated lies. Please share this story with anyone who might need to hear that fighting back is possible. Subscribe to stay connected with others who believe in justice over convenience like this content.
If it resonated with your own experiences with standing up to bullies, and comment below with your thoughts about how we can all support courage in the workplace and beyond.